verbiage, language, and a definition through which the crimes of World War II could be fully expressed, owing to the true meaning of them, right? Intended structures, why, how, results, and lens through which we see that killing. Now, some of the examples of recent genocides, if you look on board, the Holocaust. Oftentimes, Holocaust was discussed as a standalone event in human history, right? Something that has been debated by academics, victims, I'm not saying participants, it would be hard to give them a voice, but anybody involved now prominently sits as part of genocide as opposed to a separate entity. And Holocaust, by the way, also has a definition. And the word also comes from Greek, which means essentially everything's burning, everything's on fire, or it could be also carry a meaning of dedication to fire or attributed to fire and so forth. So sacrifice to fire, that's it. So look at the Holocaust, 1941 through 45 in Europe by the Nazis, who were perpetrators against Jews. In that case, low number 4 million, high number 7 million people killed. Holocaust was also affecting other populations. We can simply say Polish population, Gentile, non-Jewish, of which 18% of Poles died during World War II. So we're talking about 18%, it's nearly fifth, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, it's a huge, huge number, right? Affects everyone, every family. Holodomor, which is the next genocide, which happened in the early 30s in what today is Ukraine, by then fledgling new state of USSR or Soviet Union, through mass collectivization, meaning converting private farms ownership into collective ideals, right? That put together would be a better and more efficient way of farming, led to disastrous years in which none of the food or intended productivity has been produced, and of course ensuing a huge famine onto Ukraine. And of course, here's a low number of 2.7, 7.8 million people who die of starvation. So we're not talking just deliberate killing, we're talking starving. That is probably the worst. Yeah, I'm not sure how to define the worst case and method of killing or dying. You know, that is one of the probably the most discussed as the grotesque, right? How can you die of hunger, right? That's the idea. Of course, you have a Nazi genocide of ethnic Poles, something that I mentioned earlier. Again, low number 1.8, high number 3 million. Armenian genocide, right? And some of you maybe have heard of it. Turkish government, as of today, still does not want to recognize Armenian genocide and plays an active role of changing the discourse. So in other words, changing the words how Armenian genocide has been perpetrated in history by concretely avoiding word genocide, mass killing, intended killing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, however you see the genocide, the method can be done as cruelly as through gas chambers of World War II Holocaust, right? Most of you probably heard of Holocaust and gas chambers of Auschwitz and major concentration camps in Polish occupied territories. Genocide can be conducted through Armenian genocide and through railroad carts, in which people were put on trucks and railroad carts, sort of cattle railroad carts, and moved from city to city, during which, against all elements, starvation, et cetera, they were eliminated and killed. So you can have many methods of killing. Rwandan genocide, which is also on the list, which happened in 1994 and 1995 during Clinton presidency, right? On the watch of our, modern world, right? Televised and fledgling internet. I remember when I was in college in 1994, that was my freshman year. Yeah, we had connection to internet, and that was a big thing, guys. I mean, you don't know what it feels like to go on on the internet at the time, and to see things. And we were called, at that time, my university was called DARPA-net, like a DARPA military project, from which it was born through several techs and flagship universities throughout United States that kind of took that military software and made it public. Initially, these were Gopher accounts. I remember there was no email, there's no Windows. It was just, it's like if you want to have a perfect password today, your Gopher account back in '94 would have fit. I mean, this is indiscriminate alphanumeric letters and so forth. You can't memorize it. We all had like a printout in our pockets, like, hey, send me an email here. And we went to the Xerox copy, we copied that. Like, hey, I got your number. Crazy stuff. But this is it. Now going back to Rwandan genocide, how was it perpetrated? By machetes, right? By 15 to 20-inch blunt instruments of war, right? Machete, something that you can go to the hardware store and pick it up. And that's exactly how nearly 1 million people got macheted to death by dismembering bodies and so forth. And the reason why they did that is a relic of colonialism, in which a certain number of people or group of people were named Hutus by the Belgian authorities, and the other group of people or clans were called Tutsis. And as time went on, Belgians preferred one over the other. One had more inroads into education promotion. The other ones were kind of kept on purpose, without access. And eventually, as the degree of difference moved and social construct of difference kind of progressed in the country, at some point there was this sort of a Marxian explosion, right? And one group took to the other, and there you go, 1 million deaths within a span of a few years. And of course, that promoted mass migrations all throughout Central Africa to Congo, and then back. And then again, the victims became the perpetrators of a new crime on the Hutus. Yeah, so complicated matters. This is not a time probably to talk about it, but genocides like that happened. Circassian genocide in Russia back in the 1860s. 2 million people killed. Cambodian genocide, right? Pol Pot regime in the 1970s. Herero genocide, which kind of gives a precursor to Nazi Holocaust, in which German Southwest Africa was occupied, just like most of the European nations, right? Moved on to Africa, and by essentially eve of World War I, meaning by 1914, I think nearly 100% of Africa was colonized. I think bar Ethiopia and one more nation, everything else was divided by a handful of European nations. And of course, Germany took Southwest Africa, of what is today Namibia and western part of South Africa. And of course, there they encountered ethnic African populations that sort of rebelled against them. And of course, the way to control it has developed, walked through the path by the French, by the British, how to control local populations, indigenous populations, right? Non-European populations. We have methods, concentration, right? Starving, killing, hanging, flogging, inaccessibility to resources, promoting those versus that. So you create that artificiality of division between one and the other. You attribute bad things to one group, you promote the other, and over time that becomes very natural and normalized. And when that becomes normalized, acting upon these urges seem not ethical or immoral. They become mechanistically right, So, and of course, we have a whole bunch of other genocides: East Timor, Darfur. I mentioned here California, right? Native Americans in California, Central and Northern California. Australia with Aborigines in Tasmania. Chechnya, right? There was a huge the Uyghur in China now, right? Guatemala, Maya people, right? That have been sort of culturally and also ethnically discriminated against and killed en masse. Rohingya, Bangladeshi, Yazidi during ISIS. I'm not sure if you guys remember, not too long ago, 2014, 2015, ISIS, rise of ISIS in modern-day Iraq, Syria, and so forth, and that sort of Congo bloodlands of Europe, and when you see bloodlands of Europe, I mean this whole Central Eastern Europe, that sort of area, which had systematically, I would say, been a borderline between empires. Consider Russia as an empire, we consider Austria-Hungary as an empire, Prussia or Germany as an empire, sometimes even Poland, depends on what century, right? So this is a sort of a moving element of those borderlands in Europe in which boundaries have not been set in some sort of a river or mountain ranges. This is a plain. We're talking plains, like Great Plains, prairies of our mid-continent, right, in which the fluidity of the boundary depends on ethnicity, language, culture, and who carries the biggest stick, right, at that given moment. So Polish on Ukrainian, Tatars or Ottomans on Russians and so forth. So that boundary has been very fluid and became sort of synonymous with bloodlines. Even today, sometimes when you notice Ukrainian flag, that is not that national flag, we're talking blue and yellow, we're talking the other flag that Russian Federation attributes it to a Ukrainian promotion of nationalism or ultra-nationalism or even fascism, right? We're talking the flag that has a black on the bottom and red on the top. Have you seen that sometimes? You haven't seen it? Some military units of Ukrainian troops carry that, and that signifies the black earth of Ukraine, right? The fertile lands of the whole country, and red symbolizes blood. So earth and blood. So we're talking like this, even iconographic images of flags and symbols have this sort of genocidal past, right? In which you knew from which that color comes from. You know, we're not talking daisies and sunflowers. Yeah, we're talking black earth, right, which symbolizes both death, you know, productivity, food, production, renewal, and then the red blood, right? That kind of soils, and that's just the mixture of it, the essence of the nation. And I don't want to go on a poetic here. Yeah.
Using your Holocaust.
Yeah.
And we talked about the difference between the former and the words Holocaust.
Holocaust, yeah.
That originates from genocide.
Yeah,
so
yeah. Okay. Oh, so you so I'm kind of repeating.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, yeah. So I'm not going to go because there's plenty of slides. So if I mention something ahead of time, I just go fast. I'm going to skip a slide here and there, but we're current. So, oh, absolutely. As far as the idea of what you see during Holocaust and 1940s of deliberate elimination of Jewish populations, specifically in Poland, as a historical founding, meaning, what do I mean by it? It would be too easy to attribute that sort of cruelty to the Germany alone, as if they came up with an idea. No, the idea simmered, right? The idea of anti-Semitism and hate for another, anti-Semitic tendencies in Europe existed for centuries, right? You might hear a fool somewhere say like, oh, Jesus was killed by a Jew, you know, and this is why, this is the bottom of that sort of hatred between Christians and Jews. And of course, that has nothing to do, it's not even truth, yeah? We all know that Christianity was a branch of Judaic traditions, right? It was called even a sect at some point. First Christians, including Jesus himself, were Jews, right? In order to go big, you have to go to Gentiles, to non-Jewish populations. And of course, those sort of games of wordage, of victimology and who killed who, and that's sort of absolving the role of Romans at the time in early Christianity as the good guys that were just observing. No, I mean, you know, things are being twisted, yeah, depending who's in the structure, who owns the word, yeah, whose monopoly is on the written and orally transmitted information. So of course, that's exactly how the discourse will go. Of course, you have those Herero genocides that kind of gave that systematic elimination of people for Germans and their own experience with how to do the Holocaust, right? You have Armenian genocide, which happened just a decade or two right before World War II genocides. You have genocides in Russia, and you have genocides and pogroms on Jewish populations all throughout. We're not even talking about Poland. We're talking about Ukraine. We're talking about Belarus. We're talking about Russia. Russia even made laws in the early or late 19th century, which made it illegal for Jewish populations to live in certain cities, and made it enforced for them to live in certain cities by essentially squeezing the Jewish population to what was called at the time Pale of Settlement. So when the World War II happened and Nazi Germany went through Poland and attacked Soviet Union at some point, this is the Pale of Settlement. This is the area in which the largest concentration of Jewish populations throughout Europe were there. And that goes also historically. During Inquisition in Spain, right? Jews were sort of removed from Spain or forced to Christianize, right? Convert to Christianity. Those who left moved to Germany. And of course, that pogrom, that fight, that hate, that elimination kind of moved with geography, and eventually Polish kings at some point hoping to create a well-functioning economy, and knowing that culturally and societally, a lot of Jewish populations were not allowed to hold land or own land. They were forced to certain professions, right? Trading, motel keeping, innkeeping, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, Polish kings at some point decided, like, well, we have plenty of farmers, we have plenty of nobles. We just don't have that middle class. We just don't have those bankers. We don't have those money changers. We don't have those people that deal with the small little businesses and logistics. Come on to us, and certain privileges were afforded to Jewish population throughout history. I'm not talking that Poles were great towards Jews. Poles were probably more accommodating. However, racism and persecution still exist, right? So we're not going to paint it into black and white. It's still a gray area of deciding it. Something that happened in Ukraine in 1918, 1921. So I'm kind of alluding to Ukraine a lot because I think the end of presentation is sort of the war in Ukraine, if you're still here with me and not falling asleep. 1918, 1921, pogroms in Ukraine. We're talking post-revolutionary Soviet Union. The revolution happened in 1917, right? So sort of collectivizing, re-engineering the whole country according to this new system of communism, right? Away from private property, so everything has to be collective. And of course, that not only ensues the hunger and famine in Ukraine, but also results in finding a scapegoat, right? A typical trope of anti-Semitism is what? Is to find a scapegoat for the troubles in your country, right? The economy is not running well. The bomb exploded there. There's this unrest among student population. They're going too much to the left, or you're going too much to the right. Jews are. A kid is lost in the neighborhood. I bet you the Jews are. They eat the babies, et cetera, et cetera. This is not outrageous. It sounds ridiculous, but the idea of blaming a Jewish population in town for the death of an infant. That could have been a stray dog that attacked the infant and left the bloody trail and so forth, but no, it's going to be attributed to the Jews, right? Or to Roma and Sinti population, the gypsies of Europe. So this is nothing new. This has been cultivated, I would say, and normalized in Europe through centuries, and eventually sort of exploded with Holocaust during World War II. Now, here's a New York Times article, the last line of the power slide, which says, the heritage of atrocities, meaning that every few years there has been a pogrom or action against the Jews of town, whether communists accusing Jews of private property and being too capitalist, whether Poles were capitalists accusing Jews of being too Soviet-like and communistic, whether Ukrainians themselves seeing Jews a little bit richer than themselves and wanting, you see what I mean? Everyone can produce a narrative of hate to fit their own needs at the time and to eliminate the other. So here's the New York Times article from 1919. Heritage of atrocities and normalization of outcomes by physical extermination of Jews was even noted, as someone wrote 127,000 killed in Ukraine during those pogroms, and 6 million at risk. 6 million, we're talking about roughly 6 million population within that pale of settlement, that area in that geography. So what are the dimensions? You know, typically you want to make your country better. So you establish some sort of utopian line of thinking of the future. So make utopian reality a reality. You know, make Germany for Germans. We've heard those, you know, statements. Yeah, Italy for Italians. Make Poland great again. Does it sound familiar? Erase and tropes of racism, something that I mentioned earlier, as tools of division. The unreal becomes real, followed by judicial rules, residency rules, and laws. So when you slowly, now Holocaust did not happen over sudden. There are books and there are journals. One of the diaries that I've read, awfully long. I mean, we're talking about the Jewish academic man who was a teacher, university student, Klemperer diaries, yeah? Oh, you did? Oh, okay, so you guys know this, yeah? In which, you know, it's just a little bit of time, a week at a time, you know? Correct. Right. So there's also diaries in Poland and France, and all kind of go in the same line. So if you would have drawn a line, I have a marker here. So this is like the graph of like time and y, or the measure of Holocaust, or measure of intensity. It's very low. It goes like this. And all of a sudden, that's it. It's almost the same curve as falling empires. The empires fall gradually. A little bit of time, one war, bad campaign, something happens, economy, hunger, another invasion, and then boom, collapse. Soviet Union, for instance. Yeah, Soviet Union, nobody sees it coming, right? From a perspective of time, knowing us, what happened in history, you'll say like, how? Let's just talk about Klemperer. He's in Austria somewhere here, and he's in the opera, you know, goes to the opera by himself. The next day, there's a sign, Jews not allowed. Tickets can be only obtained for shows displaying on Sunday. So what do you do? Like, oh, it's not a lottery, right? And you know, at some point, the government makes the point of forbidding Jewish professors or Jewish ancestry to lecture full time. But they can be able to do every once in a while deal with. Local physicians could provide service to non-Jews or Aryan people in Nazi Germany, and they're permitted to do it for the longest time, despite other professions like their was only great. All in school, you know, you can have to everybody's lessons. You can have necessities, right? At some point, your ID has to have other things as a Jew. So, So that's not right. The whole is closed, and there are consequences. laws and documents. Also with components, like I haven't heard of something that's in Germany as a German, which was recently by the to it is so very anonymously. We also have will live based on their social characteristics, or racial or racial characteristics. It's nothing to do with biology at all. So with that in mind, things like eugenics, yeah, are born. And by the way, yes, right? This section of this class is on eugenics. Okay. Yeah. So they know how. So you know where I'm going. The ideas of degenerations, right? Those tropes that if for our society to be strong, we have to eliminate the weakest links, right? Those who have hereditary diseases and those who can pass those diseases, and of course the functionality of those people who are mentally ill or otherwise or incapacitated physically, right? We're talking disabilities, are not properly fulfilling their roles for the society, right? And if we're talking about fascist society, direction towards fulfilling it to leadership, towards the Führer, yeah, for the betterment of the country. So when you look at someone who's labeled degenerate and unable to function normally, this person in that comparison should not exist. Or is it deliberate? So of course, T4 program is something that a number of the house in which the institute was, like Tergenstrasse 4, you know, like University Avenue 5, yeah. So U5 versus T4. And the idea it was to create a formula. 10 people probably have mental have to be institutionalized, and for that one will have to be euthanized. So as early as the 30s, the T4 program has become normalized, meaning that, of course, against outcry of a lot of doctors, how can we do and kill human beings, and who calls who, you know, who makes the judgment, right? Who lives and who dies? Well, it becomes normalized. You write about it. There are papers written about it in all of the main eugenics, better future. And at some point, people sort of maneuver into that space in which, well, functionally, I guess, you know, it's a huge cost on the society. You know, we pay taxes, and look, you have to employ a group of doctors, and there has to be a separate building. Can you imagine all of this could have gone to university or babysitting and stuff like that? Like, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. So you quickly rationalize as a right avenue to do that. And then before, in all the graduate program, essentially between that sort of a proto-Holocaust history. Yeah, the office had at some point some sort of residency connection to the program between the forerunners and final solution eventually during the Holocaust, in which they designed the best methods of euthanizing population. You know, and as productivity grows and functionality has to exist, because we have a, you know, one thing with the Hitler too, during the Nazi Germany, it's not that we have a timeline of 20 years, right? No, it's the urgency. It has to happen now, as Hitler would have said, because our nation is in peril. So of course, some of the products before would be gas by diesel, yeah? Diesel trucks, yeah? They call it Kaiser coffees. Yes. You know, imagine Kaiser coffee. It's a coffee delivery truck, right? It's a van. And we go in, and I think we minutes for rebels in that van. And there were bubble shots, air bubbles, you know, because they started to become you know what a bubble is, right?
Mhm.
You see cardiac arrest,
Right.
in the bubble. So we're inserting air bubbles into the left to Turkey. And that was efficient enough. Why? Because you have to have a trained, right, or whoever knows how to do it, or doctor or nurse, and you can only do some people in an hour. Right. And of course, that's psychologically demoralizing for the laser. That's exactly what you see from. So the idea of bubble inserting into the brain became this new process. Yeah. So that's also. So we need to do something else. What do we do next? Yes. Yeah. So there's um, proportionality, inventiveness, industrial scaling, right? Because we're talking from 100 people to now hundreds to thousands, right? To eventually millions, right? And we live in a sort of age of modernism in which even Hitler in his office had a picture of Henry Ford, right? The father of sort of assembly line in our country. Yeah, he called him Heinrich Ford, and Ford himself was a anti-Semite. He has been recorded to say a few things on the side, and perfect connection, right? Germany and fascism and sort of that productivity using that modern approach to it. Although the fascist, their approach to fascist ideology of their own system was sort of anti-modernist in a way. They were kind of bringing that geist of longevity, that the spirit of Germany, which, when you're talking about spirits, you're not talking about modernism, right? Modernism is all science, right? So there was sort of a conflict there, but nonetheless, that's the direction where things were going. And of course, other things other than T4 program, you have reform camps. You have the camps for re-education, like Dachau initially in 1933, and Schlossberg, I think, was also sort of an education camp, and eventually people would come in and check in for a week and get released. Sometimes for the holidays you get a pass. So that doesn't really look like Dachau of 1940s, right? It's still 1930s in which petty theft and antisocials and homosexuals and others are being prosecuted also as degenerates of the population to be eliminated. So you have that before the deportations and ethnic cleansing and mass exterminations. Have you guys heard the terminology of ordinary man versus the neighbors when it comes to the genocide of World War II? Ordinary Man was a book written by Christopher Browning, who said that just about anyone can become a killer. In fact, he used some of the Milgram psychological experiments with voltage. I'm not sure if you took ever psychology class. There's this famous experiment. It's sort of very much like Stockholm syndrome, right? The prisoners, et cetera, et cetera. So the Milgram experiment is based on the fact that a person or the subject, right, is put in a chair, and I control the experiment, but I put a nice lab coat and I have my pad and I look professional. I have my tag of doctor, right? And I say, the next door, you can't see that person, but when I tell you to dial up the voltage, that person will feel it. But don't worry about that person. It is between me and that person, so you just, I'll tell you when. And of course, for the experiment, if you go beyond the 100 mark, that is a full dosage of voltage the person likely will apply. And guess what? Because of the authority figure, right? Me in that lab experiment, most of the people sitting, and I bet you if we had a similar experiment here at the beginning of semester, that would be a lot more matter at the end to see how many of you would be susceptible. It doesn't have to be that exactly. Other experiments are designed exactly to do the same thing or to present the same outcome. So 80% of people would actually dial up. And when I told, let's just say that subject, dial up to 105, or 105, this is legal. Because of me giving an order, the person still does it. There's only about 20% of people who would say, like, no, I'm going to walk away, despite how bad it looks. I'm losing my face. I'm going to walk away. So very few people walk away. So that's why I'm saying ordinary men. Most, and I'm going to say most in that case of that scenario, soldiers in German army or SS would likely commit to the order given without question. And another thing that also played on is the unit cohesion and the idea that, well, I don't feel like I want to kill, but then if I don't kill, I'm going to look bad with my guys. I don't want to be ostracized from my own unit. You know, of course, there were a few guys who would say, like, the special units, Einsatzgruppen in the Eastern Europe, that parallel to the Holocaust in Auschwitz and other concentration camps in which people were gassed, there were mobile units in what is today Belarus and Ukraine surrounding essentially police units, guys at my age, in their 40s, who have been cops in Hamburg or other cities and could not be physically maybe fit to run with the grunts and Marines or, you know, SS, you know, with 20-year-old boys. So they had that sort of a second youth, you know, they were still fulfilling the police pacification role of Einsatzgruppen, in which they would surround the town, take all the men, separate from men, from women and children, take the men to the forest, shoot them all, right? And then you'd be shooting all day, you know, 10 men at a time, you know, and then have the other dig graves for the others, you know. So that was a process, but it was also a long process. It cost a lot of money because of bullets, and some men psychologically would break down at some point. Everybody has a fuse, right? Some people can take it far, and some people can take it a little, you know, and eventually they go through the shell shock. Right? So there were some people who would not do it, and a majority of people would do it. We're talking men who have families, who have children, you know. So again, psychology of killing, right? So it's not just bad people who kill, right? It's not that very few that you know, oh, that guy, I know if he would. No, you can turn masses into killers, right? And that has been demonstrated throughout history that things like that do exist. And neighbors is sort of a neighborly approach to looking at someone else's property. Thomas Groth wrote it, in which for the first time this huge debate exploded in Poland in a post-war period. It was early 90s, that Poland also, well, always was, or Polish people put themselves in a discourse of victimhood, right? And rightfully so, right? So it was very inconceivable to see Polish villages pacifying Jewish neighbors for purposes of pilferage, making their stuff, you know. And some of the dimensions here in the neighbors was the fact that when Poland was attacked in 1939 by Nazis from the West, 2 weeks later, Soviet Union attacked Poland from the East. Some of the Jewish population in that town quickly turned familiar with the Soviets, which Poles resented. So when the Germans came in and took the Soviets out, the Jewish neighbors remained. Now, Germans bringing that sort of anti-Semitic ideas, Poles hating for what just happened. You see how naturally things fell? All the Germans had to do is like, hey, just you do what you have to do. We're looking the other way. In fact, it's preferable you do it that way. You see how I'm going? So that discourse, the idea of neighbors, also played a huge role in the genocide and Holocaust studies in Poland. And then bloodlands, I mentioned that terrain cleansing forest. So here's the bloodlands, the geographical area. Germany to the left here, and I'm placing the map. Czechoslovakia, so you have Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, and Baltic republics, and you have Soviet Union. So this area during World War II, during 1930s, was that exactly area of bloodlands. Yeah, that's where the old Pale of settlement was. That's where the biggest concentration of Jewish populations was, and so forth. When there's few ideas on how to approach Nazi complex killing between 1942. It's really this is the sort of probably 3 years ago. Why happened? Why it's during that time? Well, as Germany is going and occupying Poland, right? And they're moving eastwards. What they're increasingly encountering is the Jewish towns, right? Which were called shtetls. Jewish towns in which Poles and Jews lived together, peaceful times before war, it was normal. 30% of Jewish population, 40%, sometimes you get 80% of Jewish population remaining is Polish, yeah? Or as you go a little bit further east in Eastern Poland, it could have been Ukrainian, Jewish, and Polish, right? So with that mix and that sort of hatred and ideology or anti-Semitic ideology, it become essentially functional for the Germans to start to think about final solution or solution of cleansing the lands, knowing that these lands will at some point belong now to Germany, and not only for a few years, but it's going to be a 1,000-year right-leaning state. You also have to think that Nazi ideology not only included elimination and acting upon all these social Darwinistic eugenics, cleansing, the idea of purity, Aryan purity, and so forth, but also agriculture. Think of it. Germany is a landlocked country, right? Germany had colonies around the world, but Germany did not go through manifest destiny as some other countries did. Meaning, for the growing population and growing industrialization of the country, Germany was sort of landlocked and couldn't go any further. In other words, Germany could not extend to the west. Why? Because there is this powerful France there. There's England, right? There's powerful Italy, Spain. All countries have solidified centuries of their own agency, individuality, their own nationhood. So they saw East as their own manifest destiny in colonizing Eastern Europe. So initially, during the talks of eliminating Jews, some of the ideas were to send Jews to Madagascar, meaning the island off the coast of Africa. And that was quite accepted idea. People thought, yeah, well, we can just commit shipping and start moving thousands and thousands of people out of, completely to the remoteness of Madagascar. As the movie Madagascar, right? You started thinking like, it's a real place, it's a real island. Other ideas were to send them to South Africa or Namibia and other places. And then, with the successful war with Russia, as Nazi Germany attacked Russia and Soviet Union in 1941, despite the fact that Stalin, who was a Soviet leader, signed a pact of non-aggression and friendships forever with Hitler. Eventually, that pact fell apart. Nazis broke it and attacked Stalin, to his incredulous surprise, right? Because he just committed purges in his own army. He was also ethnic cleansing his own empire, right? Called himself sort of an emperor without clothes, right? You're on the paper, you look great, but look what you got. You're knowing that nothing's going to happen in the next 10 years. He's going to have time, but now Germany attacked. So when Germany attacked, the discourse of sending people to Madagascar, Jewish populations, changed into sending Jews to Siberia. Because as German army attacks Soviet Union, it goes so easy. Soviet army is unprepared. Their non-commissioning officers are non-existent. Most of the officers who served in the Soviet army in 1940s are typically from prominent families of pre-revolutionary aristocratic families. So of course, Stalin is purging that because he doesn't want any kind of residue of a Romanov. He wants to have a communist, right? He wants to have this new man idea in the army. And of course, these new men have no education or experience. So for the German machine, it's just becoming quite easy, right? Of course, we see that image of a blitzkrieg, right? Germans on tanks and so forth. Of course, you have to understand that this is exactly what Germans produce for you to see. Germans were not blitzkrieging. I mean, they had more horses than anybody else. So 10% of the army was maybe well mechanized divisions. Everything else was horses, and 90% of all their stuff came on horses. So of course, that's also part of the discourse, how you project yourself in power outside to the world versus what's the reality. So it kind of connotates to the today's Russia's federation and their army, right? Forever we're thinking like, oh wow, this is a big army, and a huge humiliation, right, in Ukraine if you follow the company things are developing. So that's the idea of sending Jews to Siberia. So by the time Russia is sort of taking part in this returning from back in around the Battle of Kursk in 1943, this is where the highest extent of the Nazi Germany reached into the Soviet Union is. And there the film is concerned. The reason why Holocaust happened in those common years of 1943 is because of the option of Madagascar. Really unwanted elimination, annihilation. So this is why we have the height of the concentration camps in 1942. Some of the big ones. How are we with time?
Well, we got another hour.
Okay, good.
Now
Good.
you're fine.
I'm sorry, guys. I mean, I can talk. At some point, you need a break. I think we need a break, right? At some point.
Well,
Okay.
Let's take a break for your side too.
No, I'm good.
Are you good?
Yeah.
But if you have something you need to get up.
If you need to get up, just go. Yeah.
We quit early, that's why we just.
Gotcha. So some of the biggest concentration camps, of course, most people ask, well, how many concentration camps were there? I will tell you anywhere between 30 to 40,000. And what I mean by 30 to 40,000, it doesn't mean that there's 30,000 Auschwitz-like camps. No, Auschwitz was the biggest. But we're talking about smaller camps. We're talking about armories with the slave labor. We're talking about POW camps in Austria, like Mauthausen, and in which military POWs, allies, would be sometimes put in the position of regular Auflag or Astellag, for soldiers, NCOs, and officers, but sometimes into slave labor. I think Nazi Germany tolerated Western ally POWs more than they did Soviet Union. Soviet POWs were exterminated. In fact, when Nazis created this camp, Belzec, in 1942, I think that was, and it was running for about 6 or 7 months as a result of a war program and final solution. This was right outside the Polish city of Łódź. Very industrial, very pre-war, very Jewish-centered businesses and textile industries and stuff in Poland. So when ghetto of Łódź was to be eliminated, they did this experimentation with the first concentration camp. Yeah, they call it either KZ or KL. And this is exactly where they started diesel fuming people. And eventually the idea of bringing some sort of better productive gas, which eventually will become Zyklon B, right? Zyklon gas, granulated, sort of like a hamster pellets. When opened and exposed to the air, all of a sudden you have this chemical reaction that produces gas, and then the gas is heavier than air, so it just fills up first and just kind of rises. If that room, we would be just kind of filling up, and then we would be asking for air, creating this sort of grotesque structure of a dead human body.
I told them about the pyramids.
Pyramids, yeah. So this was the first one, and only one survivor. There's only one hand account of person who ran away from Belzec, survived and told the story, because that camp was closed in 43. 600 days. Okay. And no one even noticed, right? So next camp, Sobibor, which was, again, the final solution, that sort of a evolution of that debauchery, right? Sobibor created a little bit bigger, operated in 43, same idea, pellets, gas, again, 700,000 people killed, perfect. Now, what has happened, why some of these areas were closed quickly, is because local population of Jewish persons that were to be killed were killed, okay? So now logistics to bring people from other parts to that particular center did not play out much for the Nazis. So they decided to move and construct camps where the populations of Jews, or those Jewish populations, are in existence and around. So you have Sobibor, again, operated for 43. Usually most of also the closures end up with some sort of rebellion, some sort of escape in which Nazis eliminate any kind of trope of, the plausible deniability kind of idea that, oh, no, there was nothing in here. I mean, look, it's an open field. Yeah, we had some military barracks. Yeah, you see where I'm going with it. The idea of exposing that sort of final solution to the world is still much of a top secret. At the same time, the idea of exposing it and us, the Americans or the British, hearing that will be so incredibly abstract and bizarre that even here comments on this side of Atlantic, when those ideas came in 1942, Polish prisoners of war and Polish resistance would send letters to both Churchill and US leadership on what is actually happening in those camps. And usually our response was, no, Germany, such a civilized nation, that just, it doesn't make sense. That doesn't, become so outlying, what I'm talking like statistical outlier, right? Such an outlying responses that they couldn't address it. And of course, ultimate response usually from the US and British side was, well, this is the reason why we have a war. When we finish the war, when we win the war, this will also be over. But there was no direct action against concentration camps or final solutions from the Allies. There were some flybys photographing. I know American bombers photographed Auschwitz at some point, but it couldn't be determined whether it's a POW camp or extermination camp, because from the bird's eye view, it's well organized, right? You have barracks, you have wire, you have towers, Who's not to say that these might be the POWs, the Allied POWs? We're not going to just bomb indiscriminately, not knowing. So typically you would have some sort of local resistance or breakout. And of course, other camps, Helmno, also Helmno, Treblinka, that's a big one, right outside Warsaw, designed as a train station with flower beds, beautiful music. You come in and get off the train, you're like, oh, let's come this way. And of course, there's a selection, right? Left, right, and everybody's kind of going together. Slowly organized, well done. So Treblinka also, and finally Auschwitz. I have 2 slides on Auschwitz. So Auschwitz becomes a massive camp. Auschwitz was actually a combination of 3 camps. The old barracks. I'll show you pictures in just a few more minutes. The new camp, which was built by raising 4 villages 3 kilometers from the main camp, that could house 120,000 inmates, including women and children sections. And there's also Buna, Auschwitz Buna, which was more of a IG Farben. Like sometimes when I look at the highlighters, and then if it's made in Germany, that company still exists.
Yeah,
IG Farben. Yeah, one time I was like, holy, oh yeah. When you study this, yeah, when you, or Hugo Boss, right? Nazi uniforms, right? My wife always asks me, like, why don't you just get a Hugo Boss? It's like, get out of my brain on that one. Yeah. Or BMW, yeah. But anyways, let's just not go there, because when we start listing those things, the heritage of World War II is we start to doubt into driving. We're talking about Pacific War. Yeah, anybody driving Mitsubishi here? You go to family in the 1980s in the Mitsubishi, and your dad fought in the Pacific. You don't, because Japanese produce heavy industry. Yeah, Mitsubishi, the Mitsubishi's Eurofighters, et cetera, et cetera. That's exactly what we were fighting back in the time. So there's some, So yeah, Buna was a factory, and Nazis quickly realized that not only they can ultimately kill Jews, but they can also suck a living labor out of them while being incarcerated. So human labor, production lines, POWs too. We're talking factories were moved into underground as Germany starts to lose the war towards 1944, and there's more of a presence of Allied bombing. So you have the mountainsides turn into tunnels to produce Air Force, the Luftwaffe parts and airframes and so forth, done by people who were enslaved, Jews. And if you die, there's another one. So there's no respect of human life. There's none of that. You're just a number. And typically in Auschwitz, an inmate or person, I'm saying inmate as if they did something. No. A person who's incarcerated in Auschwitz, taken by the Nazis, will survive about 3 months. That's on average. And after which you're called Muslim because you lose so much weight, because not only labor, but also decrepit rations and any kind of infection will essentially kill you. And at some point in your miserable existence, you give up psychologically. So there's a lot of psychology also to how you may not survive. Simply put, most people say, like, why would people let themselves be lined up for the gas? I would fight. Yeah, you would say, I would just jump. And if we all could jump at the same time and overpower those 18 men who are guarding 180 men, maybe that would have been done. Yes, maybe, but no one's there psychologically in that zone. Most of the time, by the time you get to Auschwitz, and let's just say you were picked up in Thessaloniki, Greece, we're talking, you already been in some sort of transport. The cattle car, depends on how you get it. For about a week or two, you're a shadow of your former self. You're psychologically, what do you do when somebody says shower, water? I can't move, right? So, what about resistance? Now, you have to be a healthy mind. Because keep in mind, your legs are being shot, lined up against the wall and shot. And these are the soldiers, they were healthy soldiers 2, 3, 4 weeks earlier. And they just go up and raise their hands, and all they're thinking is, I hope he shoots me straight through my brain so I don't have to lay down for hours agonizing because I got shot in the stomach. Right? That's the line of thought. That's the psychology of that survival. So you are broken psychologically. You are a former self. We're talking about resistance. It's very rare. Usually that resistance is somehow translated, initiated by the outsiders, meaning Polish resistance breaks into the camp and creates some sort of way, some sort of hope, maybe some supplies or some smuggling going on. There were several accounts which we don't have time to talk about Polish resistance breaking in, breaking out to get the measure of what is going on and how to initiate these things. So I'm going to move on. Here's an example of some of the racial laws in Germany, and I'm going to go really quickly through those because I'm sure you've talked about it. The idea that you could be a mix dependent on whether you had 1 or 2 grandparents of Jewish descent. And once that have been publicized and found out about, you could no longer hold certain jobs, certain positions, and at some point, as time went on, your rep, your line, violence, and that system kind of becomes quickly or degraded quickly. Something that was called like civil service law or preservation of blood and honor laws. These were all Nuremberg laws in Nazi Germany. They kind of set the stage.
How did that consider growth?
Correct. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Even the idea, most people would attribute it to Nazis. I'm not defending Nazis whatsoever. I'm just saying that we are product of ourselves and our history and what surrounded us. We learn as we go, and if someone finds a solution to some problem, we tend to replicate or go back to that, maybe improve it somehow. So the idea of concentration camps was, I think, for the first time, British invented a concentration camp. Yeah, I think Boer Wars in South Africa, and British were putting not Africans, the Dutch, the Boer resistors into the camp, in which, of course, when you concentrate people, give them a little food, what happens, pandemic, et cetera, the job is halfway done, right? And they're so miserable and former selves that you can do whatever you want. And then by that means, those who are in the camp are not outside. So if something happens again, well, then that wasn't them people, there's someone else. So that's how you pacify the area. Spanish did it in the Spanish-American War. Valeriana Weyler, I think that was the name, Cubans on Cuba. Same thing. You know, Spaniards were trying to pacify the island, and they couldn't tell who's a fighter, who's a farmer by day. Sort of like Taliban versus farmer for us in Afghanistan. So we didn't resort to the concentration camps in Afghanistan, but that would be probably the next step in that sort of mindset if it wasn't for healthy minds back home, right? Because if you do want to pacify countryside, you step by step create censuses, you eliminate people.
We did it with the Japanese.
Yeah, oh yeah. Sorry.
Japanese concentration.
That's right. Right? What happened with the Japanese? Yeah. Okay. We're talking about, yes, actually there were 110,000 Japanese interned during World War II, the order 90666, whatever. And there were, I think, 11 states involved. So it wasn't just California. It was as far as Arkansas.
The big one,
Manzanar. Yeah.
So,
Yeah, if you drive towards Bishop, you'll see there's not much left. Yeah, there's not much left. There's just stones and, you know, there's a park service, plaques and remembrance, sort of the artifacts that are there. But yeah, that's the dark history of, so that's what I'm saying. It's not a monopoly of Nazis to use concentration camps. This has been done through imperialism, right? This has been done through colonization, settler colonization, right, of the world. So here's the picture. Maybe pay attention to the picture other than the script. The idea of an Aryanness. You know, how do you measure a perfect? Today, ridiculous, right? You can't measure men's intelligence on the size of a head, right? That has been demonstrated cognitively. That is not possible. But at that time, in that century, the idea of phrenology, right? Shape of your skull, whether the protruding bones behind your ear. If you feel behind your ears, guys, see those bones? If they're very much protruding, you're a least emotional person. Just found out. I'm kidding. Has nothing to do with anything. But back in the day, yeah, that was it. Okay, well, the occipital bone is flat, therefore you don't have a skills of leadership. Your frontal lobe is too high, too low, too grudgy, whatever. You have, so there were hundreds of characteristics designed based on your measurements, your circumference of your skull, your length from your hairline to the hairline, all the other protruding bones like you just fell behind your ears. Everybody has those bones, so don't worry about it. You're a good person. But that's the point. So, of course, these movements were now done on to create the image of a perfect Aryan race. Now, here's an anecdote. If they're building a perfect race, look at Hitler. He's not a blonde. Look at Goering. Very fast. Look at Goebbels. Mr. Communications. He's about 4.8. So we're talking about Aryan race. Everybody's blonde, everybody's 6'1" on average, everybody's muscular, and you know, that's sort of SS and like right. Yeah, Ken and Barbie, right. Ken and Barbie image. Yeah, it's all constructs. It's ridiculous, right? In fact, most people say, well, how can you tell a Jewish person from a regular person? There's no, it's almost like, I don't want to use examples because it's just ridiculous now. How can you tell a Polish person from Ukraine? Right, yeah. Or German from a Dutch person, or Guatemalan from Yucatan, Mexico. You know, it's like voluntarily or some sort of phonetically express it, you know, your garb or your belonging. There's really no way. But science of the day, that sort of eugenic social Darwinist kind of purported the idea. And of course, you create symbolism, swastikas and marches and gatherings, us versus them. There's this famous Benedict Imagine Communities.
Oh,
Benedict Anderson. Yeah. Imagined communities, meaning that, yeah, the famous sort of social science publication, right, that most people cite, imagined communities, yeah, in which the idea of nationhood or belonging to one group or the other is nothing else but a construct of your environment and how you position yourself towards it, you know. Because you can construct, yeah. Much of it could be explained easily through social construct. You know, current war in Russia, the Russian Federation, right? What does Putin says? Well, the Russian speakers of Ukraine are being oppressed by the Ukrainians themselves, and we're there to step in to help our Russian speakers become free. Nice. What does that mean? Those Russian speakers in Ukraine who are being bombed don't feel Russian at all, just because they speak Russian language. You know, average Canadian, anybody Canadian here, they don't feel Californian or, you know, right? I mean, in the same sense, like we're not going to go to Australia and say like, yeah, you feel like us, so we can invade you because we want to liberate you from your own government. No. So, anyways, it's a long discussion. So you have those Aryanization campaigns, yeah. Benedict Anderson, yes.
I
said Benedict, like I keep saying Benedict Arnold, and I just got stuck in. So the idea of racial purity, right? The Jews are not allowed to have their own culture. You have the Hitler Youth, yeah, the image of the perfect Nazi. You were there for the state. Do you guys know the difference between fascism? What's fascism about? I want to quickly just mention this. Like, what's the issue with fascism? And I think it's unprecedented. I think there has been a lot of talk. But historically, during the World War II or prior to the 1920s and 1930s, if on this spectrum, you'll see liberal democracy, right? Countries like the US, UK, right, in which free market, free enterprise rules the rules. You know? Now, on this side, you have communism, right? There's the USSR, right? In 1932. And then you might have here some like socialism, right? And that's so as Germany's coping with a post-World War I period in which they're clearly demonstrated that the Great Depression proved once for all that liberal democracy or capitalism does not really work well. There we go, the Great Depression rolled in the 1930s. Communism not working well to the idea that companies so removed from their homes and allowed to have that balanced connection between us. Communism is repulsive, and you know, all this kind of stuff. Except it's the what we do a third way. And third way is that fashion doesn't understand putting anywhere closer to rich respectful. Fashion that's actually born from word fashion is abundant. One pencil, great. So we can hold 50 of them, we can break them. So the idea of fashion is not just to be loud, it's a collective direction towards a goal. Group direction of necessity for one goal. And fashion allows for private enterprise, as long as that enterprise subscribe to the future goals of the future. That leadership sure to that goal. Yeah. It's not so much that people will also use no, it's right, so that's the kind of idea. So when we're moving into those fashion groups, you have other things such as upbringing, the predeterministic path, and if anybody's against it, they're called asocial or antisocials. And then if you say something along the lines that, hey, I don't want to join Hitler Youth, I don't want to run around in sticks and play soldier, and I don't like camps, I mean, I love laughing, you would be held out as a antisocial. Why? Because you stand against men. You stand against that idea of that fashion future. And of course, nothing else tells you about future of the conflict when you have brainwashed teenagers, right, being told what's good and what's right, what's not right, you know. So when you start framing young minds and then corner them into this very black and white psyche, when it comes down to ordering them to shoot, all these boys will shoot because in 3-4 years there will be an SS. So the natural progress will be Hitler Youth. You're like 10, 11, 12, 14. By the time you get 16, you have all kinds of rituals. You burn flags, you burn torches, you go through towns, you do all kinds of what men do. You burn books, etc., etc. You hook up with SS women. Well, that's another thing that probably is oftentimes interesting. Women are also bound by organizations, and women are also now removed from their family units. And some of the young women, as they were interviewed in a couple of resources that I've read, is that a young 12-year-old would say like, well, finally I'm free. I don't have to listen to my mom and dad to tell me what to do and how to do, because now I'm free of that family unit. So I can totally progress through what I want to be. I can work for the nation. I can become now important. I'm not just 12-year-old who takes it from the dad, but I'm now part of something bigger. And of course, these women will be trained how to take care of kids, how to become, combat medics, auxiliary units of all kinds of sort of things. And every once in a while, these young men and these young women would have a rendezvous, and children produced for the state will be future of Reich Germany. So sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? That sounds so well thought of, so longitudinal. So we know where we're going to be. We're not going to be like this capitalist society or communist society. We're going to be choosing our own path. We're going to create our own mythology. We're going to create our own symbolic meanings. We're not going to go with Christianity. We're looking for our own roots of pre-Christian rules, of what's important. So, okay, so I'm going to skip through some of the slides because that becomes very familiar. Here's an idea of the ID with a J. You see that little J on it imprinted? This is a passport page. So Mrs. Rosa Levinek is Jewish. So with that document, you can probably leave, or you can probably not leave. You may be accepted to the United States or not. A steamer St. Louis, which left in 1938 from Germany, packed with refugees. We're talking up to 1,500 refugees. Well-to-do, middle class, people who were able to pay for their passage. Went to Havana, Cuba, but Cuba refused them because they were Jewish. Then they turned to Miami. Miami refused them. They went to New York. New York refused them. Finally, they went back to Europe. France, other places refused them. They eventually came back to Germany. Most people perished in the Holocaust. So it's not just because you have a passport and then you can just leave, and all of a sudden you cross the line. You're like, yeah, no, because that prejudice, yeah, that anti-Semitism kind of exists on both sides. And of course, the economy is shifted towards also to exclude Jewish interests by redistribution of their property, confiscations. Kristallnacht, maybe you heard of it, the night of a broken glass in which businesses were smashed. Most people did not come back to them. So here is Auschwitz. I think, did you guys see this? So maybe I should show pictures.
Yes.
Yeah.
They've seen
Okay.
but not,
Sounds good. So I'm going to stop it right here, and I'm going to show you a collection of pictures that I have. I'm a Mac person. I'm sorry. I'm just looking. I'm doing select all. What do I do? And it will play the whole thing, all of them, or? It's an elementary thing here. Come on, come on, come on.
I know that.
So, yeah, I want to show you now, guys. These are the photos I took in 26 of our business now. And throughout my childhood, I was born in Poland. Polish. And unfortunately, as kids, even though it's really traumatizing young minds of 11, 12-year-olds, right? Brought in. And,
It's not working.
it's not also, so,
No,
okay.
I don't know.
But you don't. Okay, look. All right. Okay, hang on. I'll go back. Open with. Let's click on this. Yeah. Oh, I see. Oh, maybe this window media player. Yeah. Yes. I think that is it going to go to.
No, but they can hurry you if you stand in front of this.
I see. I see. I
Yeah.
see. So I'm gonna not move.
It's possible. I
Yeah.
told him, I said, you don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing.
Okay, that's what I was. That's right. So how do view and how do I highlight them all? Okay. Control A. Yes. Say again. Control A. Come on. Yeah. So yeah, I went to the camps as a kid and as a then moved here since, and as a college student, then as a older college grad student, right? Then as a father, each time you have a different reaction, emotional reaction. Sometimes what you see might not affect you because you're not there as much. Talking about the kids without having kids, different than talking about kids. Yeah. So this is what I mean exactly. And the more you know, that the more you see differently. The pictures because they're pictures worth 1,000 words, maybe it's a second. And oftentimes I can go.
Have that app. Because like there's one like where you can do like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
media viewer, and it feels like different slides. Yeah.
It's kind of weird, yeah. So maybe I'll just click on every one of them, yeah. Then let's see. Weird, yeah. What if I put this on your computer?
You what?
Oh, but this is not connected to here.
Yeah, yeah, it's not connected to the.
I see, I see. Right click on what? Huh? This one, media player. And this will probably, yeah, and okay. I see. Would it be go to library? Mhm.
They can have it, it's all to do with studies, you guys.
Okay. Okay. Play with playlist or media player. Huh? Okay, so I do Control A now. This one? This one? I do click once. Control A. A or Alt? And then do what now? Yeah, I think this computer does not have, which is the first time ever happened, and I kind of felt embarrassed, but I know a few of you found yourself embarrassed too.
Yeah.
Cool, all right.
Is it needed?
Yeah, media player. I think it needs media player or some
Oh.
sort of,
Oh, it may not, yeah, it may not.
so. Okay, so I'll be randomly selecting pictures because there's a whole bunch of them, so we'll see where we fall. I'll tell you the story. Oh, what happens? Again. Oh, I see. Okay, so this is the one of the wires, electric fence around Auschwitz One. Auschwitz One was a former Polish barracks, army barracks, turned into concentration camps. Camp One. Let me. Very awkward to do that way. The mouse is not working.
Yeah, yeah. That's it.
Images. Yeah. You know what? Maybe I'll go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, some of the pictures are in there, and if you guys are gonna see them, okay. So this is a good image of some of the pictures look exactly very similar. One thing about Auschwitz One is that it's made out of brick. Display setting. So, okay. Very barrack-like. This is not exactly what Auschwitz-Birkenau looked like. This is the initial. This is where people were experimented on as far as medical experiments inside Auschwitz. There are several publications and books if you're ever interested in that sort of a how to really do the wars of Auschwitz to look to a homicidal view. Some of the experimentation done on twins by Mengele. It was a camp doctor to see if there is a communication between the brains of one and the other individuals before that they're born twins. One individual will be separated in a different room, and let's just say his finger will be cut off. Would that pain to his brother 75 rooms away? And could that be somehow monitored by electric or whatever devices if one twin suffering exemplifies on that cognitive reaction of the other? So we're talking about cruel experimentation also of hurting on purpose or shooting on purpose inmates and performing several surgeries according to A, B, C, D, E plan to see which method is more effective for wounds when it comes down to helping Nazi soldiers in the field by creating the best sort of procedure methodology for field medics. So we're talking about killing fetuses or removing fetuses from pregnant women to see at which stage of life the fetus can survive on its own if it's removed. So we're talking about bizarre experiments that today you would think not even move your pen without IRB is your review board, right? At that time, you could do just about anything on it. So not only medical experiments, we're talking about basic cruelty. We're talking elimination of human beings. So let me go quickly through those pictures. Here's a pile, for instance, one of the blocks as you go through, there's a pile of shoes. And of course, when you walk into this, it's the size of this room. You walk. Profiled way, just like you can look on a human shoe. So that's just one of a room of collections. There's human hair room. There's anything that could be collected off the people as they come to the camps for their luggage and so forth was collected. We're talking jewelry. We're talking prostheses. We're talking silver or gold from your teeth fillings. We're talking hair. Even human skin was harvested. Human fat was harvested for soap. So it's very bizarre, but if you look at animal processing plants in our country and how animal fats are used, exactly same procedure was done to human beings in concentration camps. It comes down to harvesting just about anything. So it sounds a little bit like Matrix, right? But it's very functional in terms of Nazi state of mind at the time. Here's a couple of course, when people are walking within a camp, they do have all kinds of labels, right? So you know who you are and why you were incarcerated. Later on, this does not become very prominent. Why? Because there's millions of people who are going through concentration camps. But initially in Auschwitz I, you would know people by nationality, whether there are criminals, whether they're political prisoners, whether they're gypsies, whether they're antisocial. I'm talking antisocial, those who are not committing to the societal rules, or who are even homosexual or other what Nazis consider deviant. So here's a road into Auschwitz-Birkenau, which is the second largest part of Auschwitz built. This is where you have the gas chambers, and this is where you have also the blockhouses for men who would work in surrounding factories for the Nazi war regime. And of course, depending if they survive or not, eventually all of them will be eliminated and killed through gas chambers. The reason why I want to show you maybe natural selection. I think I have pictures of natural selection. No, I don't have it here, but I have it on another PowerPoint. The way trains came into the concentration camp, there was this big sort of platform. Things both ways of coming to Nazis would be with the labor before the Zone other Jews who was there. And moving into Canada. That was a main for the schools, the magazine, the warehouses for everything that was books, the money, the currency, because people were having everything. When you go on the flowers, people couldn't have anything. Even the bodies and families of the bodies were the way people came up in trains, they were immediately segregated into women, men, women and children, men. Then men were segregated into older men and younger men. Anybody who looks like you and you like you will survive because we are that labor. We're not seeing wars. So it's a thing as now, they will juice us up for about 3 months and then not nothing. Now, if we can work for during war. Anybody else? Remember, they're elderly or with kids or holding kids on their
it would go on left or right. Left right meaning we directly go in a intersection, then all the way to the parking lots. That's when the crematoria is. And that's this particular line is called showers. And the way the showers were created, they were double doors. And we're not going to double doors. The crematoria and gas members were doing that the noises and any kind of residue of panic was very funny, very well conceived. The Nazis after the doors closed, of course, everybody left their clothing or told remember where it's and so on. Longevity idea that come out of this. So that's a great point. I think that's the time feeling. Of course, once people come in, the cycle of gas through which is the ground level, right? And the gas falls, the ground falls, air, the gas goes up and top. So all the way to the water, right? So around the shower heads, there might be 50 shower heads in that crematoria. After the gas comes in, or it's kind of flying over to gas air. So when finally, when there's doors open, not from the front door, because there's a line, right? There's a lot of people waiting to get into the shower. People are open to the back. And that's where, again, the jury's always on. The movie bodies and put together the test areas of people that were using earlier. And of course, else, people's mouths are open to use. Hair mouse. The next thing will be Florida. Before bodies tell us and so it's really hard to try to describe it, and I wish our pictures worked. Maybe next time we'll fix it up, or I'll send you those pictures to you guys. Do you have any kind of questions on that? Because I don't know if we have time on Ukraine, because
I know.
I could go. I got 10 slides, but I want to leave some questions. Yeah, if you have any questions. During this call.
Well, it depends. I felt when I was young, I didn't feel anything. I hardly remember exactly what it was when I was 12 years old. I just remember busting with other kids, That's I don't remember any emotional attachment. In fact, when you're 12 years old and you're told to walk about a mile in the heat from one block to another, it's identical to the other. You're just mental, right? So dizzy. And then as I grew older, and of course you start to study, you find a connection. You become more emotional. You look at the pictures and you're like, wow, it's right here. And then at some point, and then, like I mentioned earlier, when you have family, it is completely different dimension that you bring in with you emotionally. So yeah, you become, as a young man, I was like, very nonchalant. I mean, I know that's what happened. I know exactly. I was curious, I was looking at the picture. And you're the dead, here's the grotesque pyramid. I was like, wow, you were curious when you were taking it in. Then when I was, when I came as a father, I didn't look for those pictures, In fact, looking for pictures of people who were before and after, or left wing versus right wing, knowing it was horrible. Kids conversation and images of kids and stuff. So yeah, it just grows on. It's not that you can say that visit is exactly the same. You're never the same. You don't step in the same river. Whether you are the same or the same river. Water. So yeah, it's very to grasp it. The best way to do it is probably read a lot before you go. So before you get stopped, because you've never seen or heard about Oscars before,
Holocaust, and then you just put it right in front of it, and they have tender reflexes in their medicine, made out of the skin, bits made out of skin binding, so kind of that, just necklaces and human hair and just it's like, you can really just walk away and but if you compare yourself, you know exactly what's going on. Look at it, you learn less, maybe once out the details of it, in a sense, it's like, it's always good, because if you look like something really like something say we're called that is not the one. You say this is not this is not. No, this is really true. So, things like that. What would happen to go to see? And it's also the one from the best of the scene. This one's
There's no surviving gas chamber left. Meaning, there's a story of Holocaust deniers from 1970. His name is Ernie. The Polish resistance had smuggled some explosives, and months before Russians came in, one of the crematoria, there was a crematoria 1 and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. One of them was imploded by resistance. So the whole thing collapsed. Before Nazis run away from Auschwitz to the lead at the time, they themselves included all the remaining facilities. So when you go now, the pictures of the ground, then and now, your reality is there. As you go towards the crematoria where it was at the end of a railroad ramp and some, half a mile away, there's a memorial wall with stones and obelisks and writing in English, German, Russian, Hebrew, Yiddish, and a couple of other languages, stating that you are standing on top of former crematoria was running, whatever. There's nothing left. There is, however, ruins. You can see the ruins. The ruins are there. So if you go, you'll see something that looks like a post-apocalyptic bombardment. One of the smithereens. You see the reinforcement wires and concrete and bricks all piled up with different angles and there's, so you see that side, but you can go in it. It is a visual memorial to. So you can go in and see specimens because there are pieces of material that was murdered by one of the surviving worker. At one point did that stuff for work. This was actually a day in which there's a thing with the whole crew that broke from this area and so here's looking and we have some defects. So also the middle, there is a section of Auschwitz right by the down.
Nazis were very high. Yeah, which is a, I mean, it's very important because I've seen pictures here. Yeah, yeah.
You know, Russian Poles, when they came through and they found any Nazis,
The justice was strict, you know. Usually tanked, shots, that's it. The Americans, so the American Western Front was more lenient. I don't know why, maybe it's the absence of violence, the absence of visuals of what has happened. I mean, if Nazis were doing this here in California and we were liberating that California, we would probably turn them on, right? Because we have that attachment to that victimology, right, of that entity of death, yeah. So Americans were not doing this because I think there was also a political movement in which the world was now being divided into dichotomous worlds, the communism and capitalism, so, you know, Soviet Union and America. So we were trying to get as much as expertise from the former Nazis to our side to work for the CIA or our services, SSI, yeah, and to employ them as opposed to look and so you don't have it, but the recreated chamber is there, so you can see how big it is, how it works. The size of it is 1-to-1, but not again. And then Nazis after the war began to work for CIA. Yes, yeah, I've forgotten that. Yeah, there were. Yeah, there. You know, the Nazis created networks in Europe already. So U.S. capitalized on those networks after World War II in that new Cold War, right, against Soviets. So some of the intelligence officers from German army, former German army, were now employed. Now, how involved were they in their cost? I think we were willing to close our eyes and not look. Whereas Soviets and Poles and Jewish, Mossad, was looking around the world. Anybody, famous icon. And here and there. And so you remember the American Nazi movie, the documentary, I think it was on Amazon or Netflix, about Ukrainian man who was a guard at one of the concentration camps, and then after the war he came in and worked for GM in Detroit and retired. It was a perfect community member, and all of a sudden the intelligence comes in and he's 95 and then he's now faced with deportation. And where does he go? Does he go to Germany? Germany wasn't German, it's incredible how yeah. So yeah, it's very bizarre. Yeah. Yes. Ukraine, after World War I, as a Russian Empire fell and became communist republic, right, as USSR, Austria-Hungary fell, and lands belonging to 9 different languages. We're talking Slovenians, Northern Italians, Poles, Czechs, Moravians, Slovaks, Hungarians, Austrians, all fell into different cycles. Going along with the Wilsonian policy, 14 points, if we assume that the people who live on that land are Poles, let's just draw the lines along the Polish hood, right? Czech hood, Austrian hood, along the linguistic lines, so we don't have to put in some pieces. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, not only Ukraine, that area is now super contested by Poland, which Poland had an imperial history back in the past, the 17th century, which was right from Black Sea all the way to the Baltic Sea. So it saw the opportunity to enlarge, considering the fact that Russia no longer exists, becomes a vacuum of power, right? When you have that vacuum, everybody wants to capitalize on something that everybody else is weak, and the area is no longer contested. So in Ukraine, you have several factors. You had Ukraine Republic, Ukraine People's Republic,
Ukraine Western People's Republic. You have different autonomous regions that are now striving to become new countries in a post-1918 reality. So they're trying to become like Poland, right? Take on their nationhood, their language, and become a nation. Now, what didn't work for them is the fact that Soviet Union had different plans. Soviet Union was incorporating Ukraine as a Ukraine Socialist Republic into its own sphere of influence. So you have this sort of a civil war that ensued between the whites, the reds, and the nationalists. The whites are the former Russian non were trying to reverse the revolution, go back to become a normal European nation. Then you have the Reds, the Bolsheviks, yeah, who are, of course, they want to make the communism, of course, eventually they win. And then you have Ukrainian nationalists who are trying to fit and drive up their sense of ethnicity, and it doesn't work. So you have this fight between Poland, like city of Lvov, for instance, historically, Lvov ethnically is always 60 or more percent Ukrainian, which Russians do not consider Ukrainian as a language, they consider it as a dialect. And they call Ukrainians as Little Russian. And like, no, you don't have nation, you don't have the folks where you're Russian, you're creating the Rus, no, you just need to tell you that. And so Putin in his manifesto, a month or fighting for the war, does not consider Ukraine as a country, as an entity, it's Russia. Now, is always divided or most with a Polish nobility. So in typical village, I have a Polish owner, Ukrainian workers, and Jewish shopkeepers. You know what I mean? So that's exactly how things were divided. And so after the World War I, was growth and a lot of the area in Poland, it was open war. Ukrainians fighting against other Ukrainians, and then Soviets fighting against everybody. Yes, so there was a big confusion, which eventually erupted in that sort of a pogroms, 1918, 1921, and eventually Russia took over the Holocaust and then the famine of 1930s. So yeah, it is complex. I mean, it is an area that it is not clear to divide. Even now, I'll tell you something funny. In 2008, when the Prime Minister at the time became president of the European Union here, went to Moscow on a state visit. Putin floated the idea to him, why don't we divide Ukraine? You Poles, you take your old Poland back, Lvov and the Western Ukraine, and we'll take the Eastern Ukraine. And Donald Tusk, who was a Polish prime minister at the time, he mentioned that in Poland, but nobody believed it. It's like, you won't believe what I was asked. And I didn't say anything because that just really seemed like an imperial secret room, cigar room negotiations of the 20th or 19th century. So they kind of told me in 2008, at the time when Russia attacked Georgia, they were already thinking about rebuilding the empire. And of course, Putin himself became to power in 1999, 2000 with the Chechen War. His idea of the biggest catastrophe that the human world ever knew was the collapse of state. For him, ever since, the idea was to rebuild Russian Federation in the unit of the Union to make sure that all the area of influence, as they used to be on the republic system, and those republic systems left, within a system of Belarus, where it's the quasi-Russian Federation entity, right? But others like Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh is kind of like leaning, Armenia leaning Russian, Nagorno-Karabakh not. So you have these conflicts there. Russian army was in Kazakhstan like 2 months ago when I had sort of open rebellion against the president.
less than 15. So you do have that, well, Germany is very much affected by the Holocaust, and that's undeniable. In the city of Berlin, I'm not sure if you guys been to Berlin yet, but the real estate is really, and they decided to build a Holocaust memorial, yes, which looks like a graveyard of sort of like a little block, a little smaller, tinier, bigger, bigger, and it kind of undulates with the terrain. It's a big, I don't know how many acres. I mean, I want to say 10 acres, give or take. And a narrow passage of those blocks. Kind of signify the typical European cemeteries that sort of made, you know, the graves are concrete above the ground, right? So almost like a necropolis. So they created the curriculum in Germany, the whole idea of pacifism, right? Sitting against the war, even now with a discord on Ukraine, because we're Germans, right? So we just send them helmets. You know, I remember that Germany sent helmets to Ukraine. Ukrainians replied, next time send us pillows so we can kill them from the pillows. Well, you know, the war, but it tells you the minds in which the Germans corner themselves. I'm not saying in a negative term, they live that pacifistic their life because of that stamp of concentration camps and Holocaust. Once made it in roads. I remember in the 1980s, there was an idea of paying every survivor of the internment camps $20,000. And I think there were some payouts that eventually, but most of the people died. Yeah. And they couldn't find most. And at some point, that amount was big, and there's the inflation, it became small compared to the fact that business, you know, $20,000. Yeah. So that's we own internment camps. We also own the narrative that you can't have into Auschwitz. We were to eradicate the Japanese disease. We were to secure ourselves and our cities. Yeah, that the fifth column in military terms, fifth column is the supplies, the people on the ground that might kill you, not the army itself. So we're kind of fighting against that fifth column by removing even born Japanese in the United States. And most of them, I mean, I don't know most of them, a lot of them went back to Japan. How do you come to terms when you're American citizen and you're put in the camps, you're not wanted and then you walk back. And people left, especially the older generation that were the insane. The first, it's what the secondary, have to live with less connections. So, yeah, it's hard to say because when we're talking about internment camps, this the term is only in our history books. And I know most of the people know. Has anyone here not heard of internment camps against the Japanese? Most of us did, right? We all have that in California history. I guess we own it, and wherever I go, like Pacific Museums in Hawaii is something that is here. In fact, I'm sure you can do it. That's having also which, you know, they never, they really give us, like, you know, part of their, you know, it's that context. No. That makes sense. Yeah, we know. We recognize it. You know, sometimes when we say it's results. Yes. Right. Yeah. You know, Filipino, African American, whatever. So there's no difference. Guys, you know, yeah, that's, I don't know, it's, yeah. From the conflict. You tend to forget, and you start to idealize war again. Like what happened with World War One, the last continental war that Europe had was Napoleonic Wars in 1815. And then 100 years until World War One, which kind of created this fifth generation of countries like most of you probably have that live in images of World War II. Harder, like, you know, what war is, somebody already has content with so you still have that memory of conflict in which you told you, this is what it is. Oh, it's not Marcy. No, I know. No, it's not. It's usually one thing that first, right? First of all, was really Europeans are from Venus, Americans are from Mars. Okay. What's it? It's not fighting on the other. Yes. Right. You know? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to think about that, devil's advocate, you know, saying this, oh, the woman was gonna do anything, I'm not really close to that. However, you had a point. You had a point.
Does it matter? It doesn't matter. Most of us don't even study geography. Like if I name a couple of cities,
Yeah.
you're like,
No,
sounds African, right?
we don't. When people come and do
Yeah.
slaughtered, these genocides.
Yeah.
Now we just don't.
So I think, yeah, as a student of history, I think that's what it is. That connection to that sort of a bloody, past. That if you don't cultivate it in the family, you will eventually become this kind of ridiculous, ready. All the fascist, the alt-right, Marine Le Pen, for instance, yeah, from that's one. Yeah. Yeah. Most of the young Europeans now, which is probably, I want to say, yeah, that was going on in fifth generation. I realize the ideas of that sort of utopian living, which somehow has to be accomplished through brute force. They accept it. So, yeah, you have this rise of fascism on the fronts, AFD in Germany, which is the Germany, the alternative for Germans, yeah, alternative to Deutschland, yeah. Marie Le Pen just lost the election, thank God. She was a quasi-fascist in France, right? Mostly I think you have a lot of those fascist tendencies. It tends to be that, yeah, when things are well, they have nothing to worry and blood is far away, you kind of go back to that. I don't know if it's, I have to say, connected, but that's, yeah. Maybe, yeah.
We are down to about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But I have a student that needs to make an announcement before
Yeah.
we dismiss.
Okay.
But you go ahead. Finish up.
Yeah, good question. We're not so much isolated. Yeah. Yeah. We're on top of the world because we are the biggest empire. And then a lot of people say, well, naturally something does not allow for us to talk about empire, but we are. We do have colonial possessions, we do have territories, and the citizenship is varying, right? From one territory to another. So not so much we're isolated from the world because we're living in it, and we do have a but the idea is such. If you're weak and surrounded by a lot of superpowers, you tend to want to know more about them out of not only curiosity, but also preservation. In other words, schools know geography like no one else. Right? Most of the Europeans will name several capitals of our states. We know where our national monuments are, but I ask you, who is the biggest German national tomorrow? Okay, so points of reference only depends on the position of Maria.
Yeah.
Most Americans don't even know what
Take a geography class on this campus if you can. Yeah. I'm over here on South. Yes. So they can. We have a lot of people, so they can hear you.
So hi, I'm Jocelyn. I'm with the Clay Club on campus in the art department. So we do a lot of ceramics together. And on May 4th, we're gonna have a Mother's Day sale where we're selling a bunch of ceramic stuff and sculptures and even some paintings, photography, crochet things. So if you're interested in going to that and supporting some fellow students and getting something for your mom or for your friends, for yourself, you know, do what you gotta do. It's going to be in the VAC building, and everyone should have gotten an email with the flyer already. So if you want to check out your email, it should be in there with a cool poster one of our members made. So yeah, that's my announcement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Tom, so much. So,
Stick around.
yes, and we'll still be here, and I gotta clean up all the stuff. So next Friday, we will, that'll probably be our last in-class meeting, but there are a couple of things coming up for extra credit that I'm gonna send out to you tomorrow morning, because they're next week. And one I think is something on Ukraine, so I'll get it out to you though. Okay, thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Thank you, people on Zoom. There were lots of you. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye. Harvard outbound is not due till the 20th. You have all the way to the end of the semester. Okay, bye-bye. Huh?